It's terrifying how quickly your mind breaks when something in your yard keeps appearing, even when you swear you locked every door. But before I get into that, don't forget to like the video and subscribe only if you enjoy these stories. Comment where you're listening from. And if you've ever lived somewhere that just didn't feel right, I want to hear your story for a future video. All right, get comfortable. Turn down the lights. The first night I saw the shape, I didn't think much of it. I was half asleep, getting a glass of water, and I only noticed it because the kitchen window caught a bit of movement. Except when I looked again, nothing was moving at all. Just a tall, narrow silhouette standing in the middle of my yard, like someone had planted a person there. I assumed it was a trick of the darkness, a shadow from the pine tree that leaned a little too close to the house. Maybe the neighbor's motion light flickered. Maybe my eyes were tired. I didn't even turn on the porch light to check. I just went back to bed and forgot about it by morning. The second night, it appeared again. Same time. 2:13 a.m. I only remember the exact minute because I glanced at the microwave clock when I walked past the kitchen. I felt that same soft flicker of something at the window, like a presence pressing against the glass. And there it was, still, silent, facing the house. This time I tried to convince myself it was stress. Work had been heavy, sleep had been light, and my mind was always more dramatic in the dark. I even laughed a little. "I'm scaring myself," I whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But on the third morning, when I went outside to toss the trash, the grass in the center of the yard was pressed down in a perfect oval, as if something had been standing there for hours, not moving, not shifting, just rooted. And yet the security footage showed nothing. No figure walking in, no figure leaving. Every clip from the night was the same. Empty yard, empty yard, empty yard. Not even a pixel of distortion, like the camera simply refused to acknowledge what I had seen. I tried brushing it off. Told myself maybe an animal had slept in the grass. Told myself maybe it was wind patterns or uneven watering or some other explanation people make up when the real one feels too heavy. But that night, when the clock blinked 2:13 a.m., I felt something pull at me. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. And yet my body carried me to the window before I could argue with it. The silhouette was there again. This time it felt different. Not like a shape. Not like a shadow. It felt deliberate, tall, centered, too straight to be a tree stump, too human to be anything else. I pressed my hand to the cold glass and waited for it to move, to shift, to breathe. But it didn't. And somehow, that stillness was so much worse than motion. My brain tried to make sense of it, to stitch logic into a moment that didn't want to hold it. I whispered, "What do you want?" Even though the window was shut, and I knew it couldn't hear me. It stayed until dawn, and when the sun finally spilled over the fence, turning the shape into nothing but ordinary yard, I rushed outside again. The grass was flattened deeper this time, as if the figure had been heavier or closer. I checked the cameras before I left for work, hoping, truly hoping, that I'd see something. A glitch, a blur, a flicker, something that could anchor me back to reality. But there was nothing. Just the usual time-stamped clips of a quiet yard under a quiet sky. By the fourth night, I wasn't sleeping. I sat awake on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the microwave clock as if I could somehow hold back the numbers with sheer will. But they marched on. 2:11, 2:12, 2:13. I didn't need to look out the window to know he was there. I felt it, a kind of pressure in the space around me, like the air had acknowledged a presence before my eyes did. When I finally stood and crossed the room, my hands were trembling so badly, I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I forced myself to look. The shape was closer, not by much, maybe a foot, maybe two, but enough that my breath caught halfway up my throat, enough that the yard no longer felt like a boundary. And still, the camera recorded nothing. It never caught him arriving. It never caught him leaving. He was simply part of the night now, a fixture, a ritual, a presence stitched into the darkness at 2:13 a.m. And I had no idea how many nights he had been coming before I finally noticed him. By the fifth night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't convince myself it was stress or shadows or some strange optical illusion that only lived in the corner of my vision. I hadn't slept more than a handful of hours all week. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that tall, motionless shape creeping closer, or worse. I imagined opening my eyes to find it already inside. So instead of moving through the house trying not to think about him, I planted myself directly in front of the security monitor long before 2:13 a.m. I wanted proof. I needed it. Something I could point to and say, "See, I'm not losing my mind." My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the remote when the feed blinked to life. The yard looked normal under the infrared glow. Flat, pale grass, a lazy breeze shifting the shadows on the fence, the soft, static haze of the night vision camera. Too normal. So normal, it felt staged. The clock on the wall clicked once. 2:13 a.m. And then he was there. No transition, no flicker, no blur entering the frame. 1 second the yard was empty, and the next he stood in the center of it, tall, back straight, head tilted slightly upward toward the camera. As if he had been waiting for me to watch. As if he knew I finally didn't look away. I leaned forward, breath held tight and painful. Seeing him through the window was one thing. Seeing him this close, this sharp, with the camera stripping away the excuses I'd clung to all week, that was different. That was real. His outline was too defined, too intentional to be a shadow. His arms hung unnaturally straight at his sides, like he hadn't yet remembered how to mimic human posture. The longer I stared, the more I noticed small things, details I had been too scared to acknowledge before. His proportions were just slightly wrong. Limbs a little too long, neck a little too stiff. And though the night vision washed the world in pale green, something about the space where his face should have been looked darker, as if the camera refused to show me what it saw. I don't know why I whispered to him. Maybe some exhausted part of me thought speaking would break the tension. Maybe I hoped he would vanish if I acknowledged him. But the word slipped out before I could stop it. "Hello." The figure moved, just a shift at first, a subtle ripple through his silhouette, like reality buckled around him. And then, with a slow, deliberate lift that stopped my heart mid-beat, he raised one hand, not toward the house, not toward the window I usually watched from, but directly at the security camera. He waved, not a frantic signal, not a threat. It was casual, familiar, like someone greeting a neighbor they've known for years. I stumbled back so fast the chair toppled behind me. The monitor flickered, the camera glitching for the first time since this began, as if even the system didn't know how to process that movement. By the time I reached the back door, panic drowning the last traces of reason, I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just threw myself outside because I needed him gone. Needed to prove he wasn't real. Needed to stand in that yard and scream until something made sense. But he wasn't there. The yard was empty, silent, still. Except for the ground, The grass where he had stood was shifting, not from wind, not from any breeze. It moved like something had just stepped off it, like weight had just lifted. A slow, rising bounce, the earth loosening itself after being held too tightly. My breath came out in a broken whisper, fogging in the cold air. I spun in all directions, searching for footsteps, for movement, for anything. There was nothing but the echo of my pulse hammering in my ears. I backed toward the house, unable to turn my back on the yard, every muscle ready to snap. And just before I slipped inside, the security monitor visible through the window flickered once more. For the briefest second, the camera caught something. Not in the yard, not beyond the fence, but close, too close. A blur of darkness near the bottom of the frame, exactly where the back door was. I hadn't imagined anything. He hadn't waved at the camera. He had waved at me. I didn't go to work the next morning. I didn't shower. I didn't even open the blinds. I sat in front of the security system with the curtains drawn tight, the house dim and silent, except for the quiet hum of the DVR. My hands shook every time I pressed a button. I kept replaying the moment he waved, not because I wanted to see it, but because I needed to understand how something could move like that and still feel so impossibly still. The footage from the night before loaded slowly, each timestamp blinking onto the screen like a warning. I scrubbed backward to 2:12 a.m., letting the video inch its way toward that single moment where everything shifted. At first, it looked like all the other nights, an empty yard fading into static darkness. But when I paused the feed and stepped through it frame by frame, something inside me locked into place. He wasn't still, not even close. Each individual frame, each frozen slice of time the camera captured, showed him in a slightly different posture. A tilt in the shoulders, a bend in the elbow, a shift in where his weight rested. Nothing dramatic, nothing you'd notice at normal speed, but unmistakable when laid out one after the other. He was moving continuously, too fast, too precisely, for the frame rate to register it as motion. It stitched him into stillness, not because he wasn't moving, but because the camera couldn't keep up. By the 10th frame, my chest felt tight enough to split open. By the 20th, my vision blurred. This wasn't a person. This wasn't anything I understood. He stood in the same spot every night, not because he chose to be motionless, but because that was all the camera could comprehend. When I reached the frame where he waved, the screen seemed to pulse with it. A hand lifted in mid-motion, fingers extended in a strangely graceful arc. It didn't look like a greeting anymore. It looked like acknowledgement, as if he knew exactly when I was watching and exactly how closely I would inspect every second. I don't know how long I stared at that frame. Eventually my eyes ached and I blinked, the moment dissolving into grainy green light. I forced myself to keep going, stepping through the footage, one slow, dragging click at a time. The yard stayed empty after the wave. For 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. Nothing. No blur, no distortion. Just the quiet lie of safety. Then the final clip loaded. I almost didn't recognize what I was seeing at first. The camera angle was different. Lower, tighter, not pointing at the yard at all. For a heartbeat, I thought the system had glitched, grabbed the wrong feed, mixed in footage from a different night. But then I saw the counter. The timestamp matched perfectly. This wasn't the yard camera. This was the kitchen camera, and he was standing inside. He filled the frame like he had always belonged there, his body angled toward the lens as if posing for a portrait. No blur now, no frame rate distortion. Every detail, Every unnatural proportion was crystal clear. His head tilted forward, too far, like his spine never learned its limits. His shoulders strained the silhouette of a shape that almost, but not quite, resembled a man. And where his face should have been was nothing but darkness, deeper than the shadows around him, like something had hollowed it out and left the outline behind. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even swallow. The last frame showed him closer. Impossible, instant, inevitable. As if he'd taken a step toward the camera between ticks of a clock, too afraid to measure the movement. I leaned in despite every cell in my body screaming not to. That was when I realized the most terrifying part. He hadn't appeared in the kitchen. He hadn't slipped in through the door, or climbed through the window, or broken anything at all. The camera had simply noticed him, as if he'd been practicing, testing the distance, studying the timing. He wasn't watching me from the yard. He was learning how to get inside.